Sabu this week has passed away, and there's just a few interesting things. I mean, a lot of people are making videos and talking about obviously his legacy and some of his important matches, but there's a few interesting tidbits that even I've kind of learned about is since his passing this past Sunday, which was from an apparent heart attack. Now, one thing I learned about, obviously, just lead it right off, is it's been announced that he died at the age of 60. But there is word out there that there's not a lot of people who are really actually knowledgeable about how old he actually is. Some public records say 60, but some other records say he was 61. Wikipedia has his birthday around 63/64. So I'll ask you, Brandon, right, as you join us on in here, that what do you make of the idea that this guy, he's born in the United States, he's born in Staten Island, New York, that we don't actually even know when he's born, and that's not public record into the sense of like nobody has actual, like, for example, WWE's putting out he died at the age of 60. They might not even have the accurate information.
Yeah, it's very weird, especially because it's not like he's from a foreign land, so to speak, where sometimes those records can be lost or they're not maybe documented properly. Yeah, it's very interesting because he's a native New Yorker, Staten Island, as you mentioned. Yeah, it's very weird, but you know what, for me, at the end of the day, he spent many years in the business. I want to say it was about 40 years in the wrestling business, all the way back in the mid 80s, if I'm not mistaken, was when he first popped up, and regardless of whether it was 1963 or 1964, he lived a very fulfilled life. I mean, it's he gave his heart and soul and his body. Let's be honest, he did some things in the ring. Even just a few weeks before his passing, I saw a clip where he took a bump into I think it was barbed wire, if I'm not mistaken.
It's always barbed wire with him.
Yeah, it's true. It's a Sabu thing. But I mean, he's taken so many bumps over various promotions, including, WWE. He's been in TNA. Obviously, everyone knows him from his ECW days. Regardless of when he was actually born, he's a 61-year-old, man who we recently lost, and he was a legend. And I'm very thankful for everything that he gave to this business. He took a lot of crazy bumps. Like everyone talks about Mick Foley and Mankind / Cactus Jack. Every name in the book, Dude Love, all the bumps he took. Sabu's got to be on that list as well. I mean, he gave his body for this business, and I'm very thankful. And when I saw that he passed, it was like, darn. I was like, another person, another wrestler that I enjoyed watching as a kid that is no longer with us. So I'm just thankful for everything that he gave to the business. A lot of classic, crazy matches over the years, and I'm just again thankful for what he gave, and sad that we lost him.
Yeah, he began wrestling around 1985 under the tutelage of his uncle, who was a famous wrestler in his own right, the Sheik. And that's kind of where he got his persona from. He got his persona as Sabu from Saudi Arabia. That is from an actor's name, Sabu, from the Middle East, that his uncle idolized. So he took that name, and being his uncle being the Sheik, he kind of, he went all in on, that gimmick, and very similar to like a Cody Rhodes situation, or maybe not even because Dusty Rhodes is very popular, but maybe like a Rock situation where, the person who sets the way for him, I don't know if maybe, I mean, obviously as time's gone on in pop culture, he might have, I guess, maybe outlived and outshined the career. Definitely a little more known to people who are currently around today. I know the Sheik is known as a very famous name to all of us pro wrestling fans, but like memories and things that we know for fact, that he's done in life, we don't have those like we do with Sabu because we obviously watched him more in the television era of pro wrestling. But some other interesting facts, before he came over to WWE later on in, the 2000s with the ECW gimmick, he did have 3 matches in WWF. So I guess his only 3 matches in the World Wrestling Federation before he was in the WWE later on. He actually faced who eventually went on to be Scotty 2 Hotty, Scott Taylor, in a dark match before a Monday Night Raw, and a dark match before a Superstars taping. And it was all in a short period of time. It was like October 18th, 19th, and 20th. He had 3 matches in like 3 consecutive days. One match in between, a dark match on a Wrestling Challenge taping against Owen Hart. He was Sabu for all of them. So they did actually let him have the gimmick, and they did let him get a victory over Scott Taylor, the former Scotty 2 Hottie, in his last match with the company. But one thing that I found very interesting, he was with ECW, Eastern Championship Wrestling, turned Extreme Championship Wrestling from 93 to 95. And you know, obviously him mostly through ECW wrestling, but in 1995, he went over to he went to New Japan actually, because he wasn't getting enough bookings with ECW, and he had kind of made his name before everything and started his career in Japan. So due to, not getting enough bookings and such like that, even though he was a very popular wrestler at the time in ECW and teaming up with Taz and the people of the like, he ended up going to New Japan full time for about 1 year before joining WCW. Now, I knew he was in WCW, but I always thought he was in WCW kind of post ECW, because Sandman and some of these other gimmicks made their way to WCW in like the later years of WCW when it was really crap and garbage, under, stupid names and just appearing on Thunder tapings and stuff like that. But he actually was in WCW like in the more heyday of WCW in 1995. And he actually competed at Halloween Havoc that year, October 9th in 1995, October 29th, 1995, but he made his debut September 11th, 1995 on a Monday Nitro. So Sabu actually entered most people's television screens through WCW first, because ECW
30 years ago. It was like 30 years ago. There was a match with him. I think his last match in WCW was with Disco Inferno, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. So I was always under the impression that he was in WCW like post ECW, because hey, he's really popular in ECW, maybe we can bring him over to like freshen up WCW in the later crappy years of WCW. But he actually was in WCW in the good years, I guess you'd say, of WCW, and pre ECW, like being on television, having a pay-per-view. So he was in ECW, but only known to the ECW fans, quietly and briefly. Came over to WCW, made against his essentially his American television debut in WCW, and then later on returned to ECW in later 1995 to then be in ECW all the way up until 2000, and go from that era, where we know him essentially from the ECW pay-per-view.
For me personally, though, my first memories, like not having to go back to the time machine, so to speak, and watching clips on YouTube. My first actual memories of him when I was a kid was actually, it was in like the late 90s, I want to say maybe 2000. So it was late 90s, 2000, somewhere in there, where he was actually working as a tag team with RVD. That's the first thing I can remember with Sabu, is like as a kid. Like I remember, because I've always liked RVD's always been a guy that I've always liked. I like his style. I just remember him and Sabu as a team back in that day.
Yeah, I mean, he teamed up with Sabu. He had great feuds with Taz. One of his most famous matches of all time is in 1997, Barbed to be Wired, I think it was, or Born to be Barbed Wire. It was against Terry Funk. It's just a barbed wire massacre match that's very famous and very popular in his legacy that he had in his ECW time in 1997. He was part of the invasion over to the WWF on the Monday Night Raw. And I have to tell you, like, if you watch Monday Night Raw in like the 90s when they did that little invasion, he was something like you've never seen before, because he had that famous thing in which, regardless, it's very tough to do, where you balance on the ropes, right? He does the thing where he jumps onto the chair, right? And then jumps on the rope, kind of hangs out there for a minute, does like a little Undertaker old school, and then propels himself off, sometimes grabbing a chair and doing, like a sit down skull crusher kind of thing, and through a table. But he did that like on Monday Night Raw. He'd like ran up onto a steel chair, jumped onto the ropes, then flew onto a wrestler on the announce table, which was some high flying stuff that you weren't watching on Monday Night Raw, in the 1996 era of WWF. But then after, his time in ECW, he actually didn't come over during the Invasion. Another one of those ones that, probably could have come over during the Invasion and actually given the Invasion more credibility, WCW and ECW talent alike. But he stayed away. They did the Invasion angle, with the Dudley Boys and Rhino and stuff like that, with the ECWs coming over at that time. He was in TNA at that time. And then finally came over to WWE in 2006. He was only with WWE, crazy enough, in the ECWs of the world in ECW on Sci-Fi era for 1 year. I know ECW on Sci-Fi and ECW in general lasted way too long in WWE, in its rebirth in 2006. He wasn't really a part of the first One Night Stand, which is crazy to think. He showed up in the second One Night Stand where he took on Rey Mysterio in a World Heavyweight title match that ended a little earlier than people were wanting, thanks to WWE medical staff having to show up and kind of help people out specifically from that match. It went a little bit too hardcore, and some people got injured a little early on, but he wasn't part of the original One Night Stand, which I know people, your memories, are like always kind of like different because you think you remember these people involved in these things and you find out, like the Mandela effect here. He wasn't part of that, but he actually only competed in one WrestleMania. It was a part of ECW, and where he was part of the Originals versus the New Breed at WrestleMania 23. That's his only WrestleMania appearance with WWE. In late 2007, he was done with WWE and moved along and then spent some time in TNA, spent some time on the Indies. And when crazy enough, while he was moving along and doing some things and going on the Indies and going all over the place, he actually faced off for the Juggalo Championship Wrestling, Insane Championship Wrestling heavyweight title against a young Drew Galloway in 2015 when Drew was out there trying to reinvent himself. So some of those matchups in the world of wrestling, thanks to the Indies and thanks to outside of WWE, that you're like, wow, I didn't even know those things ever happened. But Drew McIntyre and Sabu in the ring against each other at one point in 2015.
Yeah,
so
10 years ago. 10 years ago. That's crazy.
But, you just think that, there's always those like matchups like Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair that never happened at WrestleMania. And those things of like, did they ever face off? Did Mark Galloway as The Undertaker, did he ever face Sting? And, those kind of things. And more people fought against each other than you think. And obviously with Sabu being almost 60 years old, when he finally did retire and wrestling all along the way, he has fought everybody. You know what I mean? There's probably maybe even Cody Rhodes and Sabu somewhere somewhere.
He's you could say this. How many guys could say they wrestled Rick Rude and Drew McIntyre? That's not too many people on that list, I don't think.
Yeah, and crazy enough, and his last match was just about 3 weeks ago against Joey Janela at Joey Janela's Spring Break in Las Vegas, a match in which you kind of referenced, right? Crazy enough, he was thrown into barbed wire at the age of 60 and maybe even 61, which is crazy to think. And not just thrown into barbed wire, but actually ended up going right through it and just like doing a face plant backsplash onto the concrete at his age. Which is probably a more insane spot than the traditional barbed wire. And since his passing, GCW and Brett Lauderdale, the owner of GCW, has gotten a lot of grief, Joey Janela as well, because there is a lot of stories out there. One that they put out there for a publication piece talking about the passing of Sabu, and where it appears that maybe Sabu was not necessarily in the right health and the right state to be doing what he was doing at Spring Break. And maybe some supplements and some stuff was essentially given or, suggested to be given to Sabu to make sure that he made the date and made the appearance at the show. Those are still out there. Brett Lauderdale has said, he hasn't done anything in the sense of trying to put out a injured Sabu who didn't want to wrestle. He wanted to help Sabu in any way he wanted to that be out there. So he's denying that essentially, drugged Sabu to get him out there, to get him to perform, despite the fact that he was not fit to perform. But it's just crazy that those are kind of some of the final stories. And I said it before, not recently, obviously, since his passing, that it's like an Ultimate Warrior situation in where he was just in our public conscience WrestleMania weekend and then passes away like right after that. This isn't like Sabu passed away after, we're like, what happened to him kind of thing. But he was just had his retirement match, just was on television essentially and kind of put on a pedestal in front of all of us just 3 weeks ago. So his retirement was well known to all of us because it was heavily advertised. And then immediately after, before he could even book another match, something like this happens, very similar to the Ultimate Warrior, right? Getting inducted into the Hall of Fame, WrestleMania weekend, and then passing away days later. So I don't necessarily know if maybe, this is the best way, to go out, essentially, in the sense of, everyone has to pass along sometime. And the fact that, he made sure and got to be able to put a cap on his career and got to make sure that he was in the public eye one more time and make sure that when he got to go out, it was in an appropriate way in the sense of doing what he loved the whole time. It's not one of those, what ifs kind of thing. So he got to have his retirement match. He got to go out in front of a sold out crowd in Las Vegas WrestleMania weekend. So honorable that he got to do those things, very similar to Ultimate Warrior, getting to go out and be a Hall of Famer, on his way out. And, again, he's one of those guys to kind of put a bow on this, as you saw this week watching, whether it was AEW, TNA, GCW, WWE, it doesn't matter. All the companies put out something for Sabu because he was in every ring, AEW included at one point, right? Maybe not wrestling in AEW, but in AEW ring at one point as a guest.
Yeah, he was like a special enforcer, I think,
yes,
for the match. Yeah.
So, having the fact that he was in the WWF of the cartoon Doink the Clown era all the way up to GCW and a retirement match in barbed wire and everywhere in between shows you that he had done it all in the world of professional wrestling. There'll never be another one like him. And that's partly because we're in an era now, and we talk about all the time, right? Where there can't be another one like him because there's just not allowed to be another one like him, right? The game changes, right? And there's nobody out there anymore with Sabu and New Jack and Abdul the Butcher, they were very similar. They had those scars on their foreheads from all the cuts and all the self cuts, all the barbed wire, all the things that they've gone through. And I don't know, if there'll ever be another one like them that gets to be in the WWE and AEW and, on the main stage at WrestleMania, but also be the kind of character who, has bled more times than not. Do you ever think, and I'll finish off with this, do you ever think we'll get another Sabu, Abdul the Butcher, New Jack in the world of professional wrestling?
That's a good question. I mean, I would say with the way these wrestling companies promote safety and the wellness and everything, I don't see it. I mean, I honestly, I guess the answer is no. I don't think we'll see another Sabu or Abdul the Butcher. Even the Terry Funks of the world. Like I don't think we're going to see anything like that going forward. I don't think, in some respects, I don't think it's a bad thing because I want to see these wrestlers, when they're 60 and 70, not having to use a cane or be in a wheelchair. You know what I mean? I want them to be able to walk out, meet fans, come to the appearances and look in decent shape. Like, we all get older. Things don't work like they used to, but, I want to see these, these wrestlers, the wrestlers we're watching today, 20 years down the line, they're in good health, they're in good spirits, and they're still making the rounds to the convention. So, yeah, I think with the way things are now, I don't think we'll see another one like him anytime soon, at least in my opinion.
And for the good or the bad, I mean, the game overall changes, right? And that's, I think, the thing, obviously what you did in the 90s, it's not necessarily that these people won't be back. It's just that the game itself is different, right? We look at it in all sports, right? With the enforcers in hockey or, linebackers in football who are defensive linemen that play the game, at a much different pace than the super athletes of today who are hydrated and well regimented versus the guys who just ate hot dogs and drank beer and smoked cigarettes and went out there and played a football game. Yep. It's a different game. It's a different type of athlete in general. Sabu came up from a time where he had you could do those things, but also he was like a mix, right? He got to be in the cartoon WWF, but then also ECW, like a company like that, right? It caught lightning in a bottle. And I know things like GCW exist, but the things with like the Nick Gages out there, they're not going to ever be in WWE. Like that's the issue. And there might be like a Sabu kind of character. There'll always be extreme wrestlers, backyard wrestlers, deathmatch wrestlers. Those are going to continue to exist, but where they can kind of cross over and be in the mainstream as well, where like, you're on WrestleMania card while being a Nick Gage. Like I just don't see that kind of crossover probably happening. And you talk about being in a cane and being of poor health later on. That's what's crazy in all of this, right? Because some wrestlers like Lex Luger, right? They're struggling. They're learning how to re-walk at the age of 60, right? They're having those health issues, while Sabu, well, obviously he just passed away. No point, right? You know, he just wrestled a death match. He's not just like Ric Flair getting in the ring and just, you know, putting on a show one more time to the best of his ability. He looked like Sabu at 60. And that was, you know, just a wild way to go out for his career. And like I said, I don't foresee another Sabu who will be able to transcend multiple companies, be on a WrestleMania card, but then also be flying through flaming tables in a bingo hall, you know, within just years of each other. Sabu, you know, like I said, had his retirement match and is now passed on. Another ECW legend gone, you know, too early, if you will, because, you know, 60 years old, 61 years old. To people like me and you who are just regular Joes, we hope to maybe retire from our jobs at that age and still have 20, 30 years left. So it's a shame that he didn't get to actually enjoy much of his retirement from the world of pro wrestling.